Have you ever stopped to think that sometimes those who see least are those who see most? Strange, isn't it? Well, that's precisely the paradox Jonh Spencer want to reveal today. Before we begin, let me ask you, are you subscribed to the channel? If not, do it now. That way you'll help me bring you more real stories full of mystery and logic straight to you. And of course, leave a like and comment below because that really strengthens our work. Many people believe that without vision there is no testimony, that the truth can only be told by those who saw with their own eyes. But what if I told you that in this case, justice was enlightened precisely by someone who had never seen anything? It seems impossible, but this is precisely the controversy we're about to explore. Get ready. What you're about to hear challenges deeply held beliefs and shows that logic can arise from the unexpected. Imagine a courtroom where jurors hesitate, the defense attacks, and the prosecution hesitates. In the midst of this chaos, a blind, calm woman appears describing sounds, smells, and invisible patterns. With each word, the room changes, and the skeptics begin to surrender. It's almost as if reality is being redrawn before everyone's eyes. What if I told you that, in the end, it was precisely this realization that knocked the killer's mask off? This is the kind of story that not only captures your attention, but also forces you to reflect: how often do we miss the most important details in life? Simply because we trust our eyes too much. Follow me, because today you'll discover how the invisible can be the key to revealing what seemed impossible to prove. On that rainy night, the city seemed swallowed by silence, until a scream cut through the air like a sharp blade. Jonh Spencer, have seen many crimes in my life, but this one was different. The murder took place in a neighborhood that until then had been known for its tranquility, where doors stood half open and neighbors exchanged favors without a second thought. But suddenly, that calm was shattered by a cruel act, leaving everyone in shock. It's curious how peace can turn to dust in a matter of seconds. Upon arriving at the scene, I realized this was no ordinary crime. The body lay on the floor, surrounded by signs that looked more like cryptic messages from the killer himself. Nothing there was random. The victim's position, the scattered objects, even the broken clock on the wall seemed to hint at something. What intrigued me most was the lack of eyewitnesses. No one had seen anything. Or at least that's what it seemed. In my career, I've learned that true mystery rarely reveals itself at first glance. Often it hides in the details the eye overlooks. And that was exactly the feeling that overcame me when I saw that scene. As if every detail were a piece of a puzzle that would only make sense later. It was like listening to a song with missing notes, yet still realizing the melody conceals something greater. This crime had a signature, and I needed to decipher it. As neighbors murmured theories and the police tried to organize the chaos, I knew something big was beginning. It wasn't just about finding out who killed, but about understanding why. Crimes like these don't just happen. They carry buried secrets, untold stories, and sometimes even silent revenge. And deep down, something told me that an unexpected witness would emerge, capable of turning this game upside down. Amidst the confusion, a soft voice stood out above the whispers and the blaring of sirens. It was a blind woman who lived just a few meters from the crime scene. At first glance, many people might think, how can someone who can't see help in a case like this? But I've learned over the years that sight isn't always the most powerful sense in an investigation. Often, those who can't see end up noticing what others miss. She approached with firm steps, guided by her cane, and asked to be heard. The sincerity in her speech immediately caught my attention. Without hesitation, she said she had heard strange sounds that night, unusual smells, and even a pattern in the criminal's footsteps. It gave me chills. While everyone else relied on their eyes to see the scene, she relied on a parallel universe of senses, a universe that perhaps held the key to the mystery. I spoke with her separately and noticed something even more fascinating. Her way of reconstructing events was almost poetic. Every detail she recounted seemed imbued with precision, as if she had experienced the crime from another dimension. And believe me, I've seen many experienced investigators stumble upon information she brought so naturally. This made me reflect on how, in life, we underestimate those who don't conform to the standards society imposes. Her presence there was a turning point. Deep down, I knew that this woman had not only heard the crime, but it grasped nuances no one else had. It was as if she were seeing with her mind, capturing invisible echoes. With each word, I grew more convinced that this witness would be the key piece. And little did I know that her next revelations would completely change the course of this investigation. While many wondered how a blind woman could help, I already knew I was dealing with someone with a rare talent. The first thing that struck me was the way she described the killer's steps. Not just the rhythm, but the difference in weight between one foot and the other, as if there were a lightness followed by a stronger impact. This indicated a possible injury or limp, something that would go unnoticed by anyone distracted. Then she spoke of a metallic sound, a constant shuffling that echoed along with her footsteps. Just imagine, in the midst of panic, anyone would have noticed only the most obvious noise, but she committed every detail to memory, as if composing a score. This reminded me of a lesson I carry with me. Small signs are often more revealing than major evidence. And in life, it's no different. It's the subtext that tells the deepest stories. Another detail she highlighted was the smell. Yes, the smell. She said she smelled a mixture of fresh paint and cheap cigarette smoke. To many, this would seem irrelevant. But to me, it was like shining a flashlight in the dark. The sense of smell, when trained, can reveal routines, habits, and even professions. I've solved entire cases simply because someone noticed a specific gasoline scent on seemingly clean clothing. Life is made up of signals we rarely take for granted. More and more, that woman proved to me that her world was made up of layers invisible to our eyes. She didn't need to see to understand what happened. What fascinated me was how she managed to translate each sensation into words that made sense for the investigation. And there, listening to her, I began to realize that the logic of this case lay not in what the eyes saw, but in what the other senses revealed. That town had a long reputation, riddled with unresolved stories. In the police station's archives, piles of cases gathered dust, and many residents no longer believed in justice. It was a place marked by unsolved crimes, abandoned investigations, and suspects who simply disappeared. For those who lived there, every corner seemed to hide a ghost, and the nighttime silence was more frightening than any scream. I'd investigated cases in this same scenario before, and I confess, it always intrigued me how an entire community could learn to live with fear. The neighborhood where the murder occurred was seen as peaceful, but everyone knew the calm was just a curtain. Like a game of chess, each neighbor calculated their moves, avoiding talking too much, looking too much, or meddling where they weren't wanted. This kind of atmosphere shapes people without them even realizing it. It's curious how the past always leaves its mark on the present. In the alleys and local bars, the tone of conversation revealed more than the police reports themselves. Fear was passed down from generation to generation, like an unwanted inheritance. When a community learns to remain silent, even the most brutal crime can fade into the background, as if it were just another line in an old newspaper. And that's precisely where the investigator's role comes in, separating myth from truth, legend from fact. In this case, the city's history wasn't just a backdrop, it was part of the crime itself. I knew that to understand the murder, I would need to delve into the hidden layers of this culture of silence. Every detail that emerged would have to be compared with the scars the place bore. After all, when the past insists on knocking on the door, it's because it's about to reveal secrets that many would still prefer to bury. I often say that to understand a crime, you must first understand the victim. Who was that person before he became just a body on the ground? As I investigated his life, I discovered it wasn't as simple as it seemed. On paper, he was an ordinary citizen, but the deeper I dug, the more uncomfortable secrets I uncovered. Debts scattered throughout the city, broken relationships, and a growing list of enemies. His life seemed like a house of cards about to collapse. In the neighborhood, few had the courage to speak openly about him. Some described him as a generous man, ready to help whenever he could. Others, however, preferred to remain silent. And silence in this kind of investigation always speaks louder than 1,000 words. I also discovered that he frequented shady places. Bars where deals were closed without witnesses and debts were collected with veiled threats. This contrast between public kindness and private shadows intrigued me. A curious detail is that among the papers found in his home were hastily written notes, like reminders of secret meetings. Some names there caught my attention, especially since they had crossed my path in other obscure cases. It was as if his life was intertwined with an underworld that few saw, and when someone lives on that edge, the risk of falling is inevitable. The deeper I delved into the victim's profile, the more I understood that the murder wasn't a random act. On the contrary, it seemed the inevitable result of a life full of risky choices, but there was something that didn't add up. Despite his enemies, there was a subtle, almost hidden detail that led me to believe the motive for the crime wasn't as obvious as it seemed. When the first clues began to emerge, I confess that everything seemed to point to an obvious suspect. It was almost as if the case was ready to be closed within hours. There were scattered fingerprints, superficial testimony, and even a reasonable motive. But experience has taught me that when everything seems too easy, we're probably facing a trap, and that's exactly what I felt as I revisited every detail. Contradictions began to appear in the testimonies. Witnesses claimed to have seen the suspect at a certain time, but minutes later stumbled over their own words. One said he was wearing a dark coat, another, a light-colored shirt. These discrepancies may seem trivial, but they are crucial. A solid case doesn't rest on flimsy versions. And with each contradiction, my suspicions grew. What intrigued me most was the blind witness's consistency amidst the chaos of the other accounts. While neighbors contradicted each other, she consistently described sounds and details. This alone revealed something important. Someone was trying to push the crime in a direction that was too convenient. And in life, when someone tries to rush the truth, it's because they're afraid of what might be discovered. At that point, I realized I wasn't dealing with a simple murder, but a fabricated narrative. It was as if someone had staged a show to incriminate whoever came along. The initial contradictions were just the beginning, and I knew that if I kept pulling on this thread, I'd soon unravel a much larger ball of yarn than anyone could have imagined. With each account from the blind witness, I immersed myself deeper into the crime scene, without needing to return. She described the sounds with almost surgical precision. She spoke of the cadence of the footsteps, firm yet irregular, as if the killer were carrying a physical or emotional weight. There was also the metallic creaking, perhaps of an object being dragged or a still unknown weapon. These sounds were like pieces of a puzzle I needed to rearrange. The most fascinating detail was when she mentioned the criminal's breathing. She said it wasn't labored from fatigue, but rather marked by a strange pause, almost as if he had a habit or a condition. Just imagine, while everyone else was relying on cameras and eyewitnesses, she deciphered the crime by the rhythm of a breath. It reminded me of cases where small quirks, like a nervous tick or a repetitive cough, revealed unlikely culprits. Another sound she highlighted was a low, almost imperceptible whistle that appeared between pauses in the movement. To most, it would be an insignificant detail, but to her it was someone's signature. "Nobody whistles like that by accident," she said firmly, and I knew she was right. Criminals often leave personal marks unnoticed, as if trying to be recognized in the darkness. These sounds formed an invisible trail, each guiding me like a beacon on a stormy night. I was already beginning to connect the dots, but I knew there was still something deeper hidden there. The crime didn't just speak in silence. It sang, whispered, breathed, and it was up to me to listen with the same attention as that witness, because each noise could become the key that would unlock the next door to this mystery. What struck me most about that witness was the way she described the crime in almost enigmatic codes. She didn't just talk about sounds or smells, but transformed them into metaphors. I remember well when she said there was a clock that didn't tell the time. That sounded like poetry amidst the chaos. But upon closer inspection, I realized it wasn't a metaphor at all. It was a clock stopped at the exact moment of the murder, as if time had been frozen to record the tragedy. Another curious detail was the smell of fresh paint she mentioned. At first glance, it might seem inconsequential, but I soon realized it held a valuable clue. Who paints something in the middle of the night, and especially near a crime scene? This detail could mean anything from an attempt to conceal evidence to a territorial mark, as if the killer wanted to leave his signature invisible. The problem is, the more I thought about it, the more questions arose. With each puzzle she presented, I felt the case gain a layer of rare complexity. It wasn't just a murder, it was a message. As if the criminal was playing a mind game with me, leaving symbols that would only make sense if deciphered together. It reminded me of those times when a seemingly trivial detail, like a broken match or a door ajar, revealed the key to the entire investigation. These riddles weren't just clues. They were invitations. Invitations to delve deeper, to abandon the obvious and question everything. The blind witness forced me to look beyond traditional evidence and use logic in an almost philosophical way. And as challenging as it was, I knew there was still a final test to face. The moment these riddles would be brought to court. When the case finally reached court, it seemed as if the entire weight of the city had been concentrated in that room. The defendant, sitting with an air of forced innocence, coolly observed every move. But the big question wasn't just his defense. It was the blind witness. Some lawyers and journalists whispered, "How can someone who saw nothing assert anything?" The controversy was on, and I knew we would face resistance. The defense was quick to attack her credibility. They argued that her condition rendered her incapable of perceiving concrete facts. They tried to belittle every word, as if her senses were less valid than the myopic eyes of the witnesses who contradicted themselves from the beginning. But what they didn't expect was the firmness with which she responded. To each question, she gave a clear, logical answer, supported by details that only the most attentive could notice. It was moving to see the impact she made. Some jurors, initially skeptical, began to lean forward, attentive to her descriptions. It was as if this woman had transported everyone to the crime scene, recreating the environment with sounds, smells, and rhythms. And suddenly, the silence in the room was no longer skeptical, but respectful. A respect born from the recognition that truth can be perceived through invisible channels. The controversy, however, was far from over. While her power disarmed the defense, it also increased the pressure on me. I knew her every word needed to be backed up with material evidence. Otherwise, the case would fall into disrepute. And it was precisely at this point that the investigation took an unexpected turn. Science stepped in to validate what many had deemed impossible. In my career, I've seen solid evidence fall apart due to a lack of coherence, and flimsy testimony become the cornerstone of an entire case. But that testimony, that one carried special weight. The question was simple, and at the same time, disconcerting. Was the justice system prepared to accept that someone, even without sight, could see far more than everyone else combined? This question hung in the air like a parallel trial to what was happening before the jury. While many doubted, I had no doubts. The value of that testimony lay not in the eyes, but in the absolute attention she devoted to the moment of the crime. I remember thinking, how many times do we go through life without truly listening, without truly feeling? How many of us ignore the obvious signs because we're too busy staring into space? That woman taught me that true testimony is that of full presence, and no lawyer could refute that. Behind the scenes, the case generated heated debate. Legal experts questioned whether setting this precedent could forever change how courts treat visually impaired witnesses. Some feared it would be a legal minefield. Others saw it as a necessary evolution. But beyond any controversy, there was the undeniable reality every detail she recounted was echoed in something concrete at the crime scene. And that, for me, was non-negotiable. At that moment, I realized we weren't just solving a murder. We were, in a way, questioning how society itself measures truth. And when truth challenges established beliefs, it's either rejected or opens the way for a new perspective. And I could already sense that soon, something even more impressive would happen. Scientific breakthrough capable of silencing even the fiercest critics. It was at this point that science stepped in, like a silent but relentless witness. Experts began comparing the blind woman's descriptions with the physical evidence, and to the surprise of many, every detail confirmed itself. The metallic dragging she mentioned, it corresponded to an iron bar found near the body. The smell of fresh paint, detected in chemical analysis, coming from a can dropped in the adjacent alley. It was as if her words had the power to materialize invisible evidence. This scientific validation turned the tide. The jurors, previously divided, began to realize that this wasn't mere intuition, but a trained and real perception. The marked breathing she described, for example, was consistent with the suspect's medical history, a mild pulmonary obstruction recorded in previous exams. What seemed like a subjective detail became an unmistakable mark, almost a sonic fingerprint. Seeing this unfold before me, It was like watching two puzzle pieces fit together perfectly. I remembered other cases where science had contradicted eyewitness accounts. But here it was the opposite. It was being confirmed, almost like an intuitive scientist. This not only strengthened the case but also broke paradigms about how truth is constructed within a criminal investigation. But the more the evidence matched her account, the clearer it became that we were dealing with no ordinary witness. There was something in her past that needed to be unraveled, a reason for such precision. And so, as I dug deeper into this thread, I discovered that this woman already had a surprising history in the world of investigations. It didn't take long for me to discover that this woman was no novice in the field of observation. Before losing her sight, she already possessed an unusual curiosity, an almost obsessive interest in sounds, patterns, and behaviors. When fate deprived her of her sight, instead of giving up, she decided to further sharpen her other senses. It was as if she had transformed pain into skill. And this made me wonder, how many of us waste the potential hidden in the adversities we face? There were records that years before she had already collaborated on small local cases. Simple things, like identifying a thief by the way they shuffled their feet or recognizing a person by the sound of keys in their pocket. Neighbors saw her as eccentric, almost mystical, but to me it was clear that it was pure training and discipline. There are no miracles in perception. There are attention, practice, and resilience. I talked to her about this, and her answer was striking. While everyone tries to see what isn't there, I've learned to listen to what has always been there. This phrase stuck with me. It shows that life, in a way, gives us the chance to choose, complain about what we lack, or explore what we still have in abundance. And she had chosen the latter path, which made her not just a witness, but almost an expert in deciphering the invisible. This background wasn't just a biographical curiosity. It was the key to understanding why her testimony carried such weight. She wasn't improvising. She was applying years of personal experience, observing the world in a way few allow themselves to. And realizing this, I became even more convinced that her involvement in the case wasn't coincidence. It was destiny. But what I didn't expect was that she would reveal an even more disturbing pattern, the way the killer walked. During our conversations, she told me something that seemed simple but completely changed the investigation. The killer was limping. It wasn't a random stumble, but a consistent pattern, perceptible in the rhythm of his steps. To her, it was as clear as a signature. Just imagine, in the middle of the night, with the tension of a crime in progress, capturing this minimal difference in gait required extraordinary attention. The description made me think of people I've met throughout my career. I've identified criminals by the way they slammed a car door, or the peculiar rhythm of a lighter being lit. Small details that for most are lost in the air. And here she was, bringing a sound pattern that could narrow down dozens of suspects to just a few with that specific characteristic. That was gold in any investigation. I made a point of testing her memory. I asked her to reproduce the rhythm of the footsteps, and she, with incredible precision, imitated the sound. One firm step, the next shuffling repeatedly. I recorded it and compared it with audio recordings of suspects already in my sights. And to my astonishment, one of the names that until then had seemed out of the question fit perfectly with that uneven rhythm. It was like finding a fingerprint hidden in the darkness. This pattern of sounds not only narrowed the circle, but also revealed that the criminal had an unmistakable physical characteristic. It was impossible to ignore. And yet something told me there was more. As if the crime had left other sonic and musical traces, ready to be revealed. It was then that she mentioned something even more curious: the enigma of a whistled melody. It was during one of our longer conversations that she uttered a phrase that gave me chills. He was whistling a tune, and I know that tune. At first, it seemed like just another curious detail, but when she asked me to reproduce the melody, I realized it wasn't random. The whistling was repetitive, charged with intention, as if it were a ritual. It wasn't just a sound lost in the wind, it was a personal trademark, almost the killer's calling card. This song, she said, was old, played on local radio stations decades ago. A song that coincidentally was linked to the childhoods of some people in that neighborhood. And it was at that moment that the investigation took a different turn. Because, upon reviewing records, I discovered that only one of our suspects had a direct connection to that melody. It was his favorite song, one he'd hummed since he was a boy. Recognized by old schoolmates. It was like a secret finally being spoken. I've seen criminals leave unconscious traces. Some leave poorly written notes. Others repeat gestures at every scene. But a whistle? That was one of the boldest signs I've ever encountered. It's as if he wanted to challenge the investigator, testing whether anyone would have the courage to decipher the code. To many, it seemed like a coincidence. To me, it was such personal evidence that it was impossible to ignore. But this puzzle remained unsolved. After all, why would someone leave such a clear signature? It could be arrogance, or it could be part of something larger. Perhaps an attempt to create a parallel narrative to the crime. And deep down I knew, if he was leaving melodies, he was probably also planting false clues. And it was precisely this feeling that guided me to the next discovery. The deeper I delved into this case, the more I realized that nothing was there by chance. Some clues simply screamed false. It was as if someone had purposefully constructed a scenario, waiting for any naive investigator to fall into the trap. Fingerprints in obvious places, personal items left near the body, and even notes that seemed more staged than real evidence. I've seen this game before, and I've learned that when answers come too quickly, it's because someone is trying to manipulate you. The blind witness, with her sensitivity, also noticed this discrepancy. The sounds don't match the objects found, she said in one of her statements. And she was right. A clear example was the metallic dragging she heard, but which didn't match the iron bar found at the scene. It seemed forced, as if the killer had left the object there just to make everyone believe it was the weapon used. This only increased my conviction that I was dealing with a calculating man. These false clues had a purpose: to create an alternative narrative, a labyrinth where the truth hid behind the wrong doors. The criminal seemed to enjoy mind games, watching from afar as everyone else got lost in dead ends. It was as if he were playing chess against me, moving pieces that initially seemed brilliant but ultimately didn't stand the test of time. But this game has a twist. Those who trust their own traps too much end up leaving an even more obvious trail. And it was precisely in dismantling these farces that I realized the true nature of the challenge. The killer didn't just want to kill. He wanted to manipulate, control the investigation, and perhaps even provoke me personally. But if he thought he could trap me in this maze, little did he know I was about to turn the tables. Because soon after, I faced an even greater mental challenge, where every detail would require relentless logic. It was as if the killer had posed me a personal riddle. For every true clue, he left two false ones, requiring me to sift through everything with an almost mathematical logic. The blind witness, at this point, became my most loyal ally. She challenged me to piece together every detail: the sounds of footsteps, the distinct smells, the rhythm of breathing. It was like putting together an invisible puzzle, where the final image existed only in the minds of those with the patience to connect the pieces. This kind of challenge reminded me of an old lesson. In life, the most complex problems are rarely solved with brute force. It requires reasoning, coolness, and above all, attention to the details others overlook. While many police officers looked for large, obvious evidence, I focused on small things: the interval between one step and the next, the order of the objects moved, the almost musical sequence left by the criminal. It was a mind game worthy of a strategist. There were moments when I felt like I was trapped in a maze, with invisible walls. But curiously, it was precisely at this point that I found strength. Each false lead dismantled showed me that the killer, however clever, was also human, and therefore fallible. His arrogance made him believe he was always one step ahead. But this overconfidence left gaps I could exploit. It was as if we were in a silent duel, and his every move gave me more ammunition. The mental challenge, in the end, wasn't just finding the culprit. It was resisting the temptation to fall into traps, maintaining clarity amidst the chaos, and using logic as a weapon. I knew I was onto something big, but I also knew that the closer I got to the truth, the greater the impact of the revelation that was to come. And it was precisely in this tense atmosphere that a shocking discovery emerged, changing the course of the entire investigation. Life has always taught me that the greatest enemy of an investigation is not a lack of evidence, but familiarity. And that's precisely what made this discovery so disturbing. After piecing together the sound patterns, the breathing, and the damned whistling, I arrived at a name that until then seemed untouchable. Someone close to the victim, almost part of the family. It was as if the truth had delivered a punch to the gut. the kind that knocks the wind out of you and makes the world spin for a few seconds. The cruelest thing was to think that this suspect had never even been considered. He was there the whole time, helping, offering opinions, offering condolences, as if he were just another supportive neighbor. This proximity was part of the perfect camouflage. It's hard to distrust someone who brings food to the wake, someone who cries alongside others. But deep within those tears lurked an ironic smile, invisible to everyone except the cold logic of the investigation. The blind witness, in her sensitivity, seemed to sense this. "The danger is not far away," she said in one of our conversations. And she was right. Sometimes, the guilty party is precisely the one who sides with the pain, as if trying to control it. This revelation not only turned the tide, but also opened a huge wound in the trust of the entire community. After all, who could have imagined that the killer was among those demanding justice? This discovery, however, didn't close the case. On the contrary, it opened an even deeper chasm. Because if he was so close and had clear motives, why leave so many enigmatic clues? What had seemed like an isolated crime was now beginning to connect to something much larger, like a web of hidden agendas about to reveal itself. And it was at this point that I realized there was an entire conspiracy waiting to be exposed. When I finally connected the dots, I realized the crime wasn't just an isolated act of violence. It was part of something much larger, as if it were just the tip of an iceberg. There were hidden agendas, old debts, and secrets that spanned generations in that community. The killer didn't act alone. He was just one piece in a carefully crafted puzzle. And the further I dug, the more I realized I was poking a snake's nest. Investigating this hidden side was like opening a Pandora's box. I discovered the victim had dirty dealings with powerful people, people who preferred to remain in the shadows. And it was at that moment that everything began to make sense. The abundance of false leads, the theater surrounding the crime. Even the whistling seemed part of a larger scenario. It wasn't just about killing a man, but about sending a silent message to anyone who dared challenge this network of power. I've seen conspiracies before, but this one had a special flavor. It was discreet, almost invisible, sustained by favors and bought silence. No one wanted to talk, but everyone knew something. This pact of collective silence was as powerful as any weapon. And the most impressive thing was that, deep down, the blind witness seemed to be the only one capable of breaking this cycle, because he perceived what others pretended not to see. This revelation put me on alert. If there was a network behind it, it was only a matter of time before they tried to silence her and me. And indeed, the signs began to appear. Anonymous messages, veiled threats, suspicious footsteps around the witness's home. With each new discovery, the danger grew. And it was at this point that I realized her courage would be brutally tested. It wasn't long before the threats began to become explicit. Notes left on the door, silent phone calls in the middle of the night, shuffling footsteps prowling around her house. Anyone in her place would have retreated, asked for protection, or even given up on cooperating. But not her. With each new intimidation, her determination seemed to grow even stronger. And this deeply impressed me, because true courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of it. I remember a conversation where I asked her if she wasn't afraid of losing her life because of this case. She smiled almost enigmatically and replied, "I've already lost my sight, Spencer. What else could they take from me? Silence?" Those words echoed inside me like a slap. They showed that her strength came not only from a desire for justice, but from a conscious choice. She would rather risk everything than live in silence in the face of so many lies. And it wasn't just individual bravery. This stance also inspired the surrounding community. Little by little, neighbors who had previously hidden in fear began to reach out, offering small details, sharing suspicions they'd harbored for years. It was as if her courage had lit a flame, demonstrating that even in the dark, there's always a way to illuminate the path. This transformed the investigation into something bigger than the crime itself. Still, I knew this resistance came at a price, and the enemy, now cornered, wouldn't stand idly by. With every step we took, it became more evident that we were backing the killer into a corner. And it was precisely in this tension that the final truth revealed itself in a breathtaking way, linking the whistling, the stopped clock, and the smell of paint to the true culprit. The moment all the pieces began to fall into place, I felt that classic chill of knowing they're about to face the truth. The repetitive whistling, the stopped clock on the wall, and the smell of fresh paint weren't isolated details. They formed a pattern so clear that when I finally connected it to the prime suspect, the mask slipped. The killer was there, right under everyone's noses, feigning innocence until the last second. The stopped clock marked the exact time he had been at the victim's house, confirming his presence. The fresh paint, discovered in his shed, betrayed an attempt to cover up his tracks, and the whistle, that was the invisible thread that tied it all together. A personal mark he had carried since his youth, transformed into the soundtrack of the crime. It was as if he had left his signature, believing no one would have the foresight to decipher it. When I confronted him, I realized the chess game was over. He tried to deny it, of course, but the evidence spoke louder than any words. The blind witness, with his impressive calm, simply said, "I knew it was him from the first moment. I just needed everyone to hear what I heard." That silenced the entire room. It wasn't just the resolution of a case. It was the consecration of the strength of those who learned to see the world beyond their own eyes. The outcome was dramatic, but inevitable. The killer was taken away, the conspiracy unmasked, and the city, for the first time in years, felt that justice had conquered fear. For me, it was an eternal lesson. The truth always finds a way to reveal itself, even when everyone tries to hide it. And deep down, I knew this case would live on in the memory of those streets for a long time. After all, stories like these never truly end. They just pave the way for new mysteries. And so, after hearing this story, tell me, how many times have you ignored important signs in your own life, simply because you were looking in the wrong place? This case taught me that the truth often lies not in the obvious, but in the subtext, in the sounds, the details, the small gestures that almost no one notices. And perhaps that's exactly what's missing for you to turn around a game that seems lost. Think about it. If a blind witness was able to dismantle an entire conspiracy simply by relying on the senses he still had, what can you achieve if you learn to better use what's already at your disposal? How many opportunities, relationships, or even important decisions could you transform simply by paying attention to what most people ignore? That's the challenge I want to leave you with. Now tell me in the comments, what detail in your life have you been overlooking that could be the key to a big change? I'd love to read your answer. Because deep down, it's in the small signs that the biggest revelations lie hidden. And remember, often what you think is irrelevant can be exactly what changes everything. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll continue receiving stories and reflections that go beyond the obvious, always with riddles, logic, and twists. Because, believe me, the next mystery may be closer than you think.